She was just 13 years old, not yet a woman, still playing with dreams, still wondering how the stars moved across the night sky. But far from home, in a chamber of cold stone, a contract was signed. Gold changed hands, and with it, her life was sold. Her name was Alice de Lacy, and her story is one of the most haunting tales from medieval England. But hers was not the only one. Alice was born in the year 1281. She was the daughter of Henry de Lacy, the 3rd Earl of Lincoln. Her family was one of the wealthiest in the kingdom, and since she had no brothers, Alice became heir to a vast estate. That should have made her powerful, but in the Middle Ages, things were different. A girl's inheritance didn't belong to her. It belonged to the man she was told to marry. At just 13, Alice was wed to Thomas of Lancaster. He was the king's nephew, but this wasn't a marriage built on love. And Alice didn't choose him. Thomas was powerful, and Alice was her body, her bloodline, her lands. She was the prize. This wasn't a union. It was a transaction. Her virginity was part of the deal. Thomas became one of the wealthiest men in England because of Alice, but he didn't love her. He barely acknowledged her. Their marriage was cold, their lives are distant. She spent her days in grand stone castles, alone, isolated, silenced. Years later, Thomas was executed for treason, and, even then, Alice's pain didn't end. Soon after, she was abducted by another nobleman, Hugh de France. He forced her into yet another marriage. No ceremony, no choice. And the king? He didn't punish Hugh. Instead, he simply handed over Alice's lands. Because in those days, a noble girl's body was seen as property. Her life was never truly her own. Alice's name lived on because she came from status, because her wealth was recorded in royal papers. But what about the others? What about the girls whose names we'll never know? The daughters of lesser lords and of knights, of merchants and of peasants, girls who were bartered by their fathers, sold to older men, given as gifts to lords, in exchange for a small patch of land, a debt forgiven, or favor from a crown. These weren't fairy tales. They weren't romances. They were bargains sealed with virgin blood. Some girls were only 8. Some were 9 or 10. When negotiations for their marriage began, they were raised to be quiet, to be obedient, to be untouched. And then they were sold to the highest bidder. Their wedding night, often their worst nightmare. And no one ever asked if they were ready. No one ever asked if they wanted any of it. But Alice's story was not the only one. She was one of the few whose name survived the pages of history. Others were not so fortunate. Their stories are scattered, hidden in dusty records, or lost entirely in the silence of forgotten villages. Still, a few fragments remain. Let me tell you about Isabella of France, the daughter of King Philip IV. She was married off at the age of 12 to Edward II of England. Not for love, not for happiness, but for a political alliance. Child handed over like a precious object, sealed in gold and duty. At just 16, she gave birth to her first child, and later she would lead a rebellion against her own husband, sick of the humiliation he caused her by favoring his male lovers and ignoring her. Her purity had been a price. Her loyalty, an expectation. Her suffering went dismissed as the cost of royal diplomacy. Then there was Margaret of Anjou, sent from France to marry King Henry VI of England. She was barely 15. She brought no large dowry, just a truce between two rival kingdoms. But she was thrown into chaos, war, scandal, loss. Her marriage was meant to secure peace, but it dragged her into the heart of the Wars of the Roses. Her name was dragged through the mud, labeled as a schemer, a warrior queen, a mother of rebellion. But few stopped to wonder what she truly wanted. She was just another girl who had been sold to the idea of power. And then there were the ones whose names didn't survive, the peasant girls, the daughters of farmers, innkeepers, or minor knights. They were sold not for crowns, but for cattle, for a plot of land, for debts their fathers couldn't repay. Many of these girls were as young as 10 or 11. Virginity wasn't just valued, it was measured, verified, and traded. In some noble courts, The concept of maiden tests existed. Intrusive. Examinations meant to prove a girl's worth before marriage. Some were paraded before older men, nobles with power, land, and silver. And if the man liked what he saw, a deal was struck. The girl had no say. It wasn't always violent. Sometimes it was quiet. A tear-streaked goodbye. A short walk down a muddy road to a manor she'd never seen before. A new name, a strange bed, and a life she hadn't chosen. But the silence was its own kind of cruelty. In medieval Spain, a law known as the fuero allowed lords to take the virginity of peasant brides on their wedding night, a so-called rite of the first night. Though debated by historians, stories of these customs appeared in enough regions to make peasants tremble at the approach of a noble's horse. And even in cities where law was supposed to rule, money still bought obedience. A merchant's daughter could be promised to a wealthy patron. Not for love, but for protection, or business favors, or silence. The poorer the family, the higher the price they placed on a daughter's purity. It became their only bargaining chip, their only offering to a harsh, unpredictable world. A girl's virginity could mean the difference between starving through winter or having enough coin to survive. It was a cruel burden to carry on such young shoulders. But make no mistake, these weren't just victims. Many of these women, once sold, once married, once traded, learned to survive. Some learned to scheme, some learned to lead. A few even carved out power within their gilded cages. They became mistresses who influenced kings, wives who plotted quietly from behind stone walls, or mothers who taught their daughters how to endure what they could not escape. And yet, there were countless others who vanished. No record, no grave, only a story that could have been. Maybe she was a girl named Elsbeth, born in a village that no longer exists, sold at 12 to a baron thrice her age. Her virginity sealed the EU deal, and maybe she never saw her mother again. Centuries passed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Laws changed. Crowns were shattered, and the world moved on. But the idea that a girl's purity held value, that her worth could be measured before she even became a woman, lingered for far too long. Even today, in quiet ways, the echoes of those cruel bargains can still be felt. But when we tell their stories, when we say their names, even if only a few, we bring light to a darkness that once was normal, and that is something worth doing.